Hello everyone and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry. Today we'll be talking about one specific adventurer, Berserker. First we'll go over his stats, abilities, and skills, then I'll show off some build ideas and gameplay, and finally we'll wrap things up with overall thoughts and a look at the first chapter of Berserker's adventure story. In case you're new to this series, it's all about providing a more nuanced look at the adventures of Dragalia Lost, ones I've actually gone hands-on and have experience utilizing them. So with all of that out of the way, let's take a look at Berserker. Berserker is a natural 4-star Shadow Element defense type sword user. Sword is a rare weapon type, with only 8 other units in the game sharing it with him. And although it's hard to pin down how relevant the Dragon Haste co-ability actually is, there's little doubt that the weapon itself is powerful. Sword characters are brawlers who lead the charts when it comes to damage and skill charge per second, and their force strikes diminish the enemy overdrive gauge at a rapid clip. Berserker fits well into this mold, although as a defense unit, his stats skew much more toward HP than toward strength. In fact, when it comes to stats, Berserker has the highest HP of any Shadow Adventurer in the game, and at its maximum, that HP is ranked 5th among adventurers of all elements. Since sword units need to stay close to enemies to dish out damage, they're bound to take some hits, so Berserker's high HP is rather helpful. But when it comes to strength, Berserker fares worse. He's in the bottom half whether you look at shadow units in particular or at all adventurers across elements. Now generally speaking, I do prefer higher strength, except on healers whose healing scales off their HP. With careful evasion, a low HP high strength adventurer can work great, which is a slight knock against Berserker. Yet as Dragalia has progressed, many of the toughest challenges are genuinely hard to survive, with dodging being difficult or even impossible in the case of high dragons. While the perfect endgame challenge for Berserker hasn't emerged yet, this does make me more hopeful for his long-term viability. And besides, as a natural 4-star, his stats are more than good enough for 99% of quests in the game. For the time being, I don't think promoting him is needed unless you love his character. As for abilities, Berserker is, well, pretty serviceable. Having one ability dedicated to 100% affliction resistance is a blessing Berserker shares with all other summonable 4-star adventurers, and Blindness Rest is a practical and rare resistance to have for light Imperial onslaughts. One would think that map is the perfect playground to also utilize Berserker's first ability, Striker's Skill, since plenty of enemies spawn. But in my experience, Striker's Skill is a bit clunky to actually use. A straight 25% skill damage ability would almost certainly be better, despite the higher potential upside on Striker's Skill. More on this during the gameplay showcase. Berserker's final ability, once he's promoted to a 5-star, is Last Offense. Not bad, but not something that's especially reliable outside the context of Advanced Dragon Trials. When it comes to skills, Berserker's first move is the core of his kit. Calamity Wheel charges rapidly, hits many foes, gets buffed by his Striker's Skill ability, and even debuffs enemy strength sometimes, allowing Berserker to tank more hits and keep on fighting, exactly what his character loves most. Berserker's second skill is Living Fortress, aptly named since it buffs his own HP by 10% per use once fully upgraded up to 3 times, after which it provides a healing effect. Both the healing and max HP increase scale well off of Berserker's very high base HP, which makes him an incredible tank while using this skill. The charge time is a bit slow. You'll get in 2 Calamity Wheels before 1 Living Fortress during most quests, but this skill is ideal for longer maps to help sustain Berserker. The only shame is that it doesn't benefit from his Striker's Skill ability whatsoever. The split between Berserker's 2 skills definitely influenced my build ideas for him. Striker's Skill can only be utilized under player control, since AI do not use Force Strikes, so my first setup is designed with that in mind. This build allows Berserker to stack strength buffs using Striker's Strength on the Wyrmprint, all while stacking skill damage buffs through his innate ability. Dark Dementia, meanwhile, adds another attacking skill, which benefits from the secondary skill damage ability on Together We Stand too. Finally, Marishi 10 is here for 2 reasons. First, she's a complete powerhouse when it comes to boosting strength for shadow units. The strongest option in the game once fully unbound, useful for shoring up Berserker's weaker strength stat. But second, her skill also inflicts bleeding, and the damage over time from that synergizes really well with a tanky character who can self-heal and self-buff. My second build idea emphasizes that tankiness more, abandons Striker's skill, and is ideal for auto battle or AI control. The 5-star Shadow Sword and the Gram Sword which pats into it allow Berserker to buff his own defense, triggering the healing double buff on a wish upon the Yule Tree. The healing from that and Berserker's second skill scale off the extra HP provided by Nidhogg, hopefully keeping him above the 70% cutoff on the Wyrmprint, meaning even more defense as a passive ability. A Berserker geared up like this will be extremely difficult to take down, even if his damage output is slightly lower. For teammates, I think Berserker plays well with any characters who also have blindness res, since they'd also work well on the Light Imperial Onslaught map, where that affliction can be a problem. Edward's healing and shield skill will make Berserker even harder to take down, while Kleinman is the only other character to have 100% blindness res, reason enough to serve as a teammate on that map. The one issue with Kleinman, and why I also list him as competition, is that you may not need both him and Berserker to get the job done, and both their kits depend on Force Strikes, making them hard to juggle on the same team unless you're in co-op. Finally, I also see Rodrigo as serious competition for Berserker. He has more strength and an amazing primary ability of 70% HP equals strength. Really though, the big differentiator is that Rodrigo has paralysis res rather than blindness res, meaning both characters can carve out their own niche. Now let's take a look at some gameplay of Berserker while I discuss how he feels to play. It should be no surprise what map we're on, Light Imperial Onslaught. A quest tailor-made for Berserker in just about every way. There's lots of light enemies to Force Strike, plus blindness-inflicting attacks. I'm coming in with just a Cleo on my team, a great shadow unit available to everyone, who plays particularly well with the setup I have here. You see, the Berserker I'm using is a hybrid. It takes the double buff plan from the Wyrmprint and weapon used in the second build I posted, but also uses a Strength Dragon, in my case, a Max Unbound Juggernaut, since I lack Marishiten. Berserker is the type of unit who can pretty much wield any 4 or 5-star Shadow Dragon well, but I found myself wanting the extra smidge of strength on a previous attempt. While possible to complete solo, I found Cleo was a great teammate for this quest, especially since my Berserker does not yet have an elemental sword. Now because Cleo has paralysis res, she's going to be blinded for much of the map. But just by aiming and missing with her attacks, she can still build up SP to utilize her skills, which synergize well with Berserker. Her defense buff triggers the HP regen on his Wyrmprint. Her healing helps him continue to tank and cures paralysis, rarely inflicted by the flying eyeballs on this map. And even her co-ability helps bolster the amount healed by Berserker's second skill. Despite not mentioning her earlier, considering her accessibility and general usefulness, I think she's a great companion to Berserker in a scenario like this. As for Berserker himself, you may be surprised by how little I actually gain from Striker's skill. In my experience, the ceiling on this ability is pretty distant from the average. While the potential upside is a max of 40% extra skill damage, achieving that requires defeating 15 enemies with Force Strikes. It's harder than you might think. The sword Force Strike knocks down enemies, so if you use it early, you'll need to wait for your foes to stand up. If you interweave normal attacks and Force Strikes, you want to try and ensure your final blow is a Force Strike. But you or your AI or human teammates may sometimes, or even often, accidentally defeat enemies using normal attacks. Berserker's first skill is also great at clearing out mobs, but foes defeated this way won't up his ability counter, unfortunately. Ultimately, unlike Xander, who has stellar strength, Berserker struggles with spamming Force Strikes because his weaker power means he's one-shotting enemies less often. In turn, you really need to pay attention to when to use Force Strikes and have prior knowledge of how many hits foes can take before the final blow if you want to use Striker's skill to its fullest. But if you already have enough focus and ability to do that, then you have to ask yourself if you couldn't just as easily clear the map without really building up Striker's skill, which is what I did here. On average, when trying, I tended to cap out at 2 buffs from Striker's skill under normal circumstances with a full team on this map. That only amounts to 16% extra skill damage, and not even for the full duration of the quest, making this ability considerably worse than it may look. especially compared to those 25% skill damage abilities like the ones seen on Dragonule and Nefaria. But as you can see during this battle, not being able to optimize on that one ability doesn't matter much to the final outcome of the match. Instead, by clinging to the boss and mashing Force Strikes to diminish the overdrive bar, Berserker's sheer bulk and longevity are enough to conquer this quest. As a tank, Berserker is well suited to brute force like this, and he's perfect for auto-battling this map. Teammates who inflict bleeding also work well for that purpose. In the end, it really doesn't matter a whole lot that the AI Berserker can't use Force Strikes because his crowd control is already so good. Berserker's first skill, debuffing enemy attack and thrashing smaller mobs, is brilliant in this context. Now, as the battle wraps up, I'll provide my final thoughts on Berserker while showing off the first chapter of his adventurer story. Berserker, like most 4 stars, is a powerful character. He gets up to 100% affliction resistance, a major boon which alone separates most 4 stars from slightly weaker 3-star characters. Furthermore, his resistance is to blindness. This alone would make Berserker incredibly useful for Light Imperial Onslaught, and that is, frankly, the best case scenario for him and his kit. It's why I chose to showcase him there. And as of now, that's the hardest content Berserker is extremely helpful for completing. Besides that, Berserker will be more than fine for your normal types of quests. Daily Avenues, Elemental Ruins, Dragon Trials, or story missions, because as a shadow unit, he has no inherent weakness. But as of now, Berserker isn't too useful for higher end content, Advanced Dragon Trials specifically, since it's incredibly difficult for him to survive against High Midgard Stormer, who would basically require a maxed out, very niche team designed solely for that purpose. Because of this, I think Berserker is best left as a 4-star. He'll be awesome for tackling plenty of content for the time being, and promoting him doesn't make a big impact on his kit. Looking forward, it will likely be possible to run Berserker against High Jupiter. He does have the highest HP of any Shadow Adventurer after all, but doing so will likely be challenging as well, considering normal Jupiter inflicts paralysis, and even with Cleo, that might be an issue. Otherwise, it's hard to say how good Berserker will be for new events and content like Void Battles, but if any bosses in that upcoming mode inflict blindness, Berserker is a safe bet. And, well, that's all I have to say about Berserker, but what do you think of him? Sound off in the comments below. For this spotlight, I decided to ditch the skits and focus on the analysis, since that's where I believe my strengths are. Since conjuring up those silly skits was the most time-consuming part of past videos, hopefully this means I can get these spotlights out to you more regularly too. As always though, I'd love to hear your feedback. With that, thank you so much for watching, take care everyone, and I'll see you next time.